When the fighting finally stopped, Jack Hayes was 31 years old, and he had already lived 3 lifetimes. He had been the most feared ranger on the Texas frontier. He had ridden into Mexico and out again, trailing a name, Los Diablos Tejanos, that frightened a nation. He had helped redraw the map of a continent, and now, at an age when most men are only beginning, Jack Hayes had run out of war. What happened next is the part of his story almost nobody tells, because the legend of Devil Jack ends at the Rio Grande. But the man lived another 35 years and became someone the legend never prepared anyone for. Welcome back to the Western Ledger. I'm Lamar. This is the finale, what became of Jack Hayes after the guns went quiet, and what the whole long life of one frontier fighter can tell us about the country he helped to build. The first thing Hayes did with the peace was go looking for a road. In the fall of 1848, Texas sent him to survey a wagon route west from San Antonio toward El Paso to open a way into the new American Southwest. His old friend John Caperton rode with him. On paper, it was a surveying job. In practice, it became one of the hardest ordeals of his life. The country west of the settlements was merciless, waterless, trackless, and barely mapped. 45 days in, the party ran out of rations. They ate their pack mules. They ate whatever game they could shoot. And they kept going, north and south of the Rio Grande, through desert and mountain, for 106 days, before Hayes finally led the survivors back into San Antonio, gaunt and half-starved, in December of 1848. It was, in its way, the whole man in miniature. Given peace, he could not sit still. Handed a survey, he turned it into an expedition. Pointed at a horizon, he rode clean past the edge of the map and kept the men with him alive on the far side of it. He never found the road he was looking for, but the ordeal only added to the legend, and it pointed him in the direction the rest of his life would run: west. In early 1849, there was talk of making him governor of Texas. He said no. The federal government made him an Indian agent for the Gila River country out in the deserts of New Mexico and Arizona. He took the post, and he hated it. Because by 1849, there was only one thing on the mind of every restless man in America, and it was calling from the far coast: gold. In California, the very land Jack Hayes had just helped conquer. So he did what he had always done. He gathered a party of men, pointed them at the horizon, and rode into country no one had mapped, leading a company of 49ers overland to the gold fields. He arrived in California not as a miner, but as what he had always truly been: the man who found the way through. The California that Jack Hayes rode into in 1849 was chaos with a coastline. Gold had turned San Francisco from a sleepy village into a brawling city of tens of thousands almost overnight, a place with more money and less law than nearly anywhere on earth. Miners, gamblers, speculators, and criminals poured in from every corner of the world. The city was rich, violent, and essentially ungoverned. It needed someone to impose order. And in 1850, the people of San Francisco County elected their first sheriff. They chose the most famous fighting man in the American West. It was a strange second act: the Comanche-fighting, Mexico-invading ranger colonel, now a lawman with a badge and a county to keep. But it fit him better than anyone expected. Hayes served through some of the wildest years San Francisco ever knew. The era of the vigilance committees, when the city's own citizens seized the law with their own hands. And through all of it, the reputation that had terrified Mexico now worked quietly in his favor. Few men in that lawless boomtown cared to test Jack Hayes. By most accounts, he was good at it, firm, fair, and fearless in a job that got other men killed. He ran the county jail, chased down fugitives, and kept the peace in a city where a disagreement was as apt to be settled with a pistol as a handshake. The ranger's instincts, it turned out, translated from the open plains to the crowded street. And here, in California, the people who actually met him kept noticing the same strange thing. The man did not match the legend. They especially a fire-breathing killer. What they found was quiet, courteous, and unassuming. One traveler, writing home about the famous Texan aboard his steamer, put it this way: "A man of few words, easy of approach, without ostentation, reserved yet affable." That gap between the soft-spoken gentleman and the ferocious legend shadowed Hayes his whole life. It is one of the most consistent things anyone ever recorded about him. Devil Jack, in person, was a mild man. In 1853, President Franklin Pierce appointed him United States Surveyor General for California, putting the old deputy surveyor of the Bear District in charge of mapping and parceling out an entire state. The frontier scout had become a federal official. The revolver was giving way, slowly, to the ledger. And then Jack Hayes did the last thing the legend would ever have predicted. He got rich, quietly and lawfully. Through the 1850s and after, in partnership with his old comrade Caperton, Hayes bought and sold California land at the precise moment California land was becoming some of the most valuable on earth. He moved into banking, into utilities, into ranching, and he became one of the founders and developers of a brand new city across the bay from San Francisco, a place called Oakland. He built his family an estate in the hills above it along Temescal Creek and called it Fernwood. There he lived with his wife Susan, whom he had married back in Texas in 1847, and raised his children with the grief common to that age of burying two of them young. He graded the canyon roads down from his own land. The man who had once mapped Comanche country now laid out streets and subdivisions. Picture the distance he had come. 30 years earlier, he had been a boy helping to bury the dead of Goliad. 20 years earlier, a captain wedged into a granite crevice fighting for his life. Now he was a banker and a city father, arguing over road grades and property lines in a parlor above San Francisco Bay. Almost no one of his generation crossed that much ground, from the killing fields of the frontier to a comfortable Victorian respectability, and lived to sit quietly at the end of it. He was not quite finished with the old life. In 1860, when war broke out with the Paiute in western Nevada, they sent for Jack Hayes one more time. At 43, he took command of several hundred volunteers in the Pyramid Lake War, the last military campaign of his life, a final echo of the fighting man he had been. But the greater war, the one that tore the whole country apart, he sat out entirely. When the Civil War came in 1861, both sides wanted him. Hayes was offered high command by the Union and by the Confederacy alike. A Tennessee-born Southerner, a hero of the slave-holding Republic of Texas, who could have worn a general's stars on either side. He turned them both down. He stayed home at Fernwood, tended his land and his family, and let the great bloodletting pass him by. Whatever Jack Hayes had been fighting for on the Texas frontier, it was not, in the end, that. He lived out his years a wealthy and respected California gentleman, a Democratic politician, a delegate to the party's national convention in 1876, a pillar of his community. The most dangerous man on the old frontier grew old slowly, of rheumatism and quiet years, in a comfortable house in the Oakland hills. Jack Hayes died on April 21, 1883, at Fernwood at the age of 66. There is one last coincidence worth marking. April 21st is San Jacinto Day, the anniversary of the 1836 battle that won Texas its independence, the cause a 19-year-old Jack Hayes had crossed a continent to join. He died by pure chance on the birthday of the republic he had spent his youth defending. A tribute ran in a Texas paper that spring. It opened with a line that has clung to him ever since. One by one, the old veterans of the Mexican War cross the silent river and are mustered into the ranks of the immortal army. They buried him at Mountain View Cemetery in Oakland, 2,000 miles from the creek beds and granite domes where he made his name. Texas did not forget him. Back home, the county carved out and named for him in 1848. Hayes County, with San Marcos at its heart, still carries his name across the maps today, long after most of the people who use it have forgotten the man it honors. So what do we do with Jack Hayes? The temptation is always to pick a version, the heroic ranger who tamed the frontier with a revolver and a cool head, or the war maker whose men earned the word devils by killing people in the streets of a conquered city. And the honest answer, the one this whole series has tried to hold on to, is that both of those men are the same man, and you do not get to keep only one. He was a genuinely brilliant soldier who genuinely changed how war was fought on the plains. He was an early believer in a revolver that would reshape a continent. He was also a leader of men who did terrible things, driven by a vengeance he shared in a war of conquest he helped to win. And around all of it grew legends, Enchanted Rock, Bandera Pass, that we can barely prove happened at all, because a frontier starved for heroes built the myth faster than anyone thought to write down the facts. That gap between the man and the myth, between the record and the legend, is not a flaw to be corrected. It is the truest thing about him and about the whole violent, tangled founding of the American West. Jack Hayes lived right on the seam of it, and he left the rest of us the work of telling it straight. That is the story of Devil Jack, the Jack Hayes story. Thank you for riding the whole trail with us, from a young surveyor in San Antonio to an old man in the Oakland Hills. If this series meant something to you, the frontier isn't finished. The Western Ledger has more of it to tell in the standalone films and the series still to come. Subscribe and ride with us again. I'm Lamar. Thank you for being here.